Hello and welcome to the WorkWise for Screen podcast, created to help our screen industries better look after all the people their businesses depend on.
And stay on safe legal ground. It's part of a growing collection of practical resources and guidance that you can dip into without it taking you forever or costing you anything. It's supported by the BFI, awarding national lottery funding.
We'll be talking with people across production, distribution and exhibition, animation, VFX and gaming about the challenges to wellbeing we face when deadlines and budgets are tight, and how, most importantly, to improve things. We are your hosts, Tacita Small from the Small HR Company, the HR for Entertainment one.
And Keith Arrowsmith, the legal one, a creative industries solicitor and programme director for WorkWise for Screen.
Katie Nurse, Netspeak Games People Director, is our guest today. We asked Katie to join us because Netspeak is a remote-first studio founded on the idea that great games start with happy teams. It's a business that has creativity and care and community at its core.
We're going to talk with Katie about burnout. We know it's a complex subject, and we've both helped businesses deal with the aftermath. The stats show that more people are deciding to leave the sector, taking their talent and experience with them. So we wanted to discuss the personal and business costs of burnout.
So we've got a few questions here. How can we spot it early? What simple things can we put in place to help people to thrive? What are the business benefits of taking action?
And the opportunities we could lose if we don't. Tacita, how have you come across burnout in your professional life?
Most definitely supporting numerous businesses with workers of all types who face various stages of burnout, and supporting either line managers through helping their teams or businesses strategically on an ongoing issue due to workload, due to industry behaviour around certain departments. This can prove to be something that comes up a lot.
It's something that feels really important that we address, and what I'm hoping that we'll be able to find during our conversation today are some real practical pointers for what we can do about it. Well, to help us, we've got a special guest today, Katie. Katie Nurse, thanks for joining us. I think you're the people director at Netspeak Games.
You would be right in thinking that. Yes, I am.
Well, thanks for your time today. What brought you to the industry? Let's start there. Once upon a time.
So I've been in the games industry for 7 years. I love the industry. It's really creative, and I tend to like to work with smaller studios. I was in marketing, charity sectors beforehand, and I happened to stumble across a job in a mobile game studio, which was based in South London, and I was really honoured to become their head of people 7 years ago. And then, I've been to a couple of other game studios since. And as you've mentioned, I'm the people director currently at Netspeak Games. So I cover everything: HR, wellbeing, culture.
Can you lead me through your definition of burnout, Katie, so we can really understand and get to the bottom of it?
Yeah, so it's a state of mental, physical or emotional exhaustion that's caused by stress. And it can occur at home and come into the workplace, or it can be in the workplace. It's when you're feeling that exhaustion from a lot of stress, and a few of the signs can be that you don't want to go to work in the morning, that you're not feeling excited about going in, you're feeling quite negative about things, you're showing up late, you're feeling tired, exhausted, and a general decrease in willingness to say yes to a task where actually, and that's a change in behaviour for you. It can be very worrying when you hear about burnout. It can be one of these really big things that you might think is in the distance, but actually there's some quite small signs that could be a lot closer than what you think. And I think sometimes people think there's going to be this massive blowout and then you go off with burnout, but actually it can be over time, but there's also small signs that you can keep a lookout for to prevent it getting bigger.
I agree with you on that point. So you could be experiencing burnout and maybe not even realise it yourself, which is quite an interesting point to look at it from.
Yes, definitely. I do a lot of work with managers who maybe support employees that are heading towards burnout. But I think as well, managers can come across burnout as well. They are very hands-on as people managers, plus then they're supporting employees. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done with supporting managers in preventing it happening for their employees, but also for themselves as well.
Do you think there's more burnout in our sector than the charity sector or some of the other places that you've worked?
Yes, from my experience, 100%. So the video games industry is actually quite bad for it, I would say. So there's a culture called crunch culture. I'm not sure if you've come across that before, but it's quite prevalent in the games industry. There's work being done, but crunch culture is essentially when employees are asked to work unpaid overtime, and they're just days, really long hours. This is generally in the build up towards launching a game and potentially just after as well. So when you're creating a game, you can let the scope creep, I guess, because you always want to add something in, and then suddenly the work just gets too much for the amount of people that you have, and the scope is just too big. That can then lead to, right, we all need to just work this whole week, we need to work till 2 a.m, 3 a.m. to get this done. You've got really tight deadlines, especially if you're working with external publishers. And then I guess after the launch of the game as well, you might have a bug that needs to be fixed immediately, or you might have some things coming out of it. So people have to be on hand 24 hours. So this crunch culture has been prevalent, and it was almost seen as a bit of an initiation into the games industry, I would say. It's almost like a badge of honor. It's like, oh yeah, I did that. And we all had to stay in the office till 4 a.m. and we ordered pizza in and all this kind of stuff. And it was almost joked about, but actually what it is exploitation of employees and of their time as well. And I think there's definitely some studios where it's quite toxic, and people are encouraged to go through this crunch process to kind of get initiated, as I say, into the studio.
So do you have a way of managing it now? Because you're still a small team, aren't you? You're not a big production house. So what do you do to make sure people do have their own time away from the screens?
So I guess there's some benefits of being a small team, but we're around 15 people. And because we are a small studio and we're actually not working with publishers, so we are in charge of our own milestones and deadlines. So internally, we have a producer who, scopes the works, puts in the milestones and the deadlines, and that incorporates working within an 8-hour day. So we're always very conscious in terms of making sure the time is suitable for the workload. So we put their self-imposed deadlines. If we think, actually, we need to shift this deadline for 2 weeks to make sure that people aren't feeling stressed and overworked, then we can do that. We're in control of those deadlines, which is really great for us. I mean, there's a lot of bigger studios out there that maybe don't do that. And, we pride ourselves on employee wellbeing. So if we were to say, we've got a great culture, we look after our employees, but then actually we're putting unreasonable deadlines on the work, that obviously is against our values. So we do plan ahead as well as we can. And then if something does come up where we need to shift deadlines, then we will do that. And if it means taking certain things out of the game or, kind of cutting down on scope, then we will do that to make sure that people aren't working over their contractual hours.
Can I ask a question there then about that choice of deciding the kind of organisation that you want to be? Because it sounds very much as though the control is within your studio to not want the results of all of your efforts to be this burnout. How does that come to be for any studio? How can they aspire, or what are the actions they need to take to walk down this road of the choice is ours, the control is with us?
As you mentioned, it sits with leadership, right? Now, a CEO is a very progressive person, and I think it helps that he's also a parent as well. So he understands that work isn't everything. Some people have to finish at 5 o'clock and they can't work into the night. There's a lot of things that we think about when we say we want to be inclusive to everybody. So we have to think about everybody's situations then as well. It starts right from the start as well. I mean, I think it's almost harder to go back. Say if you've existed for 10 years and then you want to go back and change your culture and reshape your culture, I think that's almost more difficult. But I think we were quite fortunate. We've been around for 5 years, but from the start, we've had the same CEO, we've had the same leadership, that we're all very aligned in terms of what company they wanted to be. And, they've got very clear values, and they've stuck to that, and they've held each other accountable as well. And if we see certain behaviours, we call each other out, and we think, because you're right, there's still tight deadlines and there's still things that we need to work towards, but we just need to make sure how we balance the output with the amount of hours that people are doing as well.
So can I think around how you measure it? Because I can see if I'm going to be working with someone that's a bit more hard-nosed on the budgets, we're going to have to find ways of valuing that working relationship.
So we actually do wellbeing check-ins with people every 3 months. So that's just a one-to-one conversation with me and the employee. And in order for those to work, you need psychological safety, right? So it's not just something where you sit on a call with someone, you say, tell me how you're feeling. It's like there's a build-up to that in terms of your culture and how you interact day to day and, what, as I mentioned, your values and culture are. But yeah, so I do wellbeing check-ins with people and they've been really helpful. Like some things have come up there where they've said, actually, I'm not really clear in terms of what my goals are or what I need to do. And just going back to burnout as well, it's not always I have too much to do within a short amount of time. Sometimes it can be I'm unclear and I'm stressed because I don't know what to do and I don't know where to start. And, there's other things that can come into it as well. So, yeah, someone flagged to me, I'm actually not quite sure what I'm meant to be doing or what the next couple of months look like for me. So that's definitely something we picked up. And it was just a miscommunication between them and their managers. Then we'll have a conversation about that. So we look at sickness reports, we do wellbeing interviews, we do anonymous surveys as well, and we'll just do temperature checks with people. I think it's something we're very conscious of. Because we are such a small team, it does help us though, because we do know each other quite well. And I think, we mentioned those little signs of burnout. If you start to see a change in behaviour with someone, like even if it's turning up late to calls or maybe they're a bit more negative than what they used to be. And so if we start to see a slight change in behaviour, we'll straight away say, right, let's have a conversation with this person, just check in, make sure everything's okay. Is there anything that we can do or support with?
How do you help people in those positions of responsibility? Because if someone is sharing their mental states, that's quite a responsibility to hear it.
Well, training, I think, is the ultimate thing. And we recognise that it's really important to do line manager training. But I think when it comes to it, if something needs to drop, I think training is sometimes the thing that's like, that can be put on the back burner, that can wait. So I think it's just committing to training and making sure wherever possible it doesn't shift. We're already booking in manager training that's starting in March next year. It's going to be for 16 weeks, 3 hours a week. And we are being very specific with those time slots and putting them in the diary now so that this is a priority and people can recognise that. And then other things will have to work around it. We're not naive. We might have some deadlines shift and some things with the game that we need to work on last minute. But wherever possible, we'll always try not to move those manager training sessions.
It sounds like transparency around many things is a good indicator of how well things are going, but also it's the light that shines into the corners where behaviours around burnout can happen. So if you're transparent within your feedback culture, if you're transparent in the training that you're giving to your line managers, if you're just talking about stuff all the time and not allowing everything else to take over, that is also helping with this culture that you speak of, where burnout is not necessarily as prevalent in other maybe gaming studios or in other industries because you're talking about stuff all of the time.
Yeah, I think transparency is key.
What's the cost of dealing with someone with burnout?
It could be anything. You're looking at things like rehiring or bolstering in a team that maybe needs support where somebody or a bunch of people can no longer work for a period of time. You're looking at sickness payments, sickness absence. You're looking at the cost of occupational health, having to get somebody in to help you to assess whether that person can come back to work or not. You could be looking at the cost of all of your internal line managers having to do reports, answer to grievances, and the time it takes to do that. You could be looking at legal fees if something goes very, very wrong, where maybe you have to look at tribunal costs. You could be looking at harassment claims, bullying claims. It could just be anything, but it could be all of those things because you failed to establish boundaries, establish a healthy working culture. I always say to people, where do you want to spend the money, upfront or at the end? And the upfront is around the development and the training, the investment of people, having good policies, promoting a culture that is transparent and works around feedback, openness, honesty, that celebrates boundaries.
But it also helps us kind of recognise the cost associated with a bad reputation. And I think that's such a good point to see, because again, we might be able to cope with the day-to-day issues, and we might be able to kind of ignore them to some extent. But if you've got that reputation then why would someone commission work from you? Why would a freelancer decide to volunteer their services? It becomes a barrier for everybody. And Katie, how do you keep up with the latest thinking on how to tackle burnout? Because I can see that you might have a good reputation for dealing with it today, but how do you keep up with the best thinking, the best practices for tomorrow's reputation?
Yeah, so I'm a member of a lot of different networks, and, CIPD, I get their regular newsletters through. I'm signed up to a lot of different HR newsletters. I actually run a HR network as well within the games industry, which brings together standalone HR people. And one of those things we look at is what's coming up in the next 6 to 12 months, what's a change in policy and legislation. We run webinars, so we'll get some lawyers on to give us that kind of advice or anything that's coming up. So it's about doing the research yourself, like connecting with networks, looking up to see what changes might come through. And and with this HR network, there is a community, and we keep chatting about things and best practice, because the games industry typically hasn't been the best place to work in the past. And there's a group of us trying to make that better. And we hold each other accountable outside of each other's companies as well, which is really nice. So it feels like we're working together to make the industry a better place to work for everyone.
Because I can see that for some people, having these kind of conversations in a public or a semi-public forum might be a bit of a challenge. Again, it's talking through things that I might not feel comfortable about. But you've found a network, a peer-to-peer network of people who can support each other through something like this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually essentially supporting the people, because they are, the HR people maybe are the people that don't get that much support. They are the ones supporting or helping others. So for this network, it's at least helping those people. And I wanted to go back to a point that you mentioned earlier in terms of if you're an introvert and you didn't want to talk about something, or you find it really hard to vocalize how you're feeling or around a situation, I think it's quite nice to know as well, you don't have to have a call. You can actually just do some Slack messages. Especially the new generation coming through, they prefer to speak about things written down rather than having a call. So I think having different avenues in terms of how people can communicate with you, because once you get on a call face to face, or if you meet up face to face, it's quite hard to articulate. So some people might find it easier to write it down and say, I might be sending you a paragraph right now, but this is how I'm feeling, and I just wanted to let you know this is going on with me. So it's about encouraging those different styles of communication as well.
Tacita, do you see standard policies in place for things like burnout, or do you have to find a much more nuanced, sophisticated way through to making sure that we're addressing this in a proper way?
I think there are lots of policies in place already that organisations would have that talk to burnout, things like flexible working policies, wellbeing programs, maybe transparency around project planning, how we tackle learning, training and development. So there are things in place, grievance policies in place, disciplinary also. I think they're very crucial to highlight. You could have maybe an overarching statement about burnout and crunch culture if it's something that you've been affected by if it's known across the industry, or if it's happened within your organisation historically. It could be make a statement that helps and points people to the right direction around the policies that you have in place. I think where organisations are not privileged to have a HR function or a HR person, that's where it's going to become really prevalent, because having a HR manager dedicated to you, if you're under 50 people, I think it's quite lucky. And I don't know if you'd agree with that, Katie, or not, but a lot of companies that are very small don't even think about HR in that way. They'll have contracts and they'll have policies, and we'll get on with it and we'll do a good job. And then when we can afford to, we'll get somebody in to maybe look at it. And the person that's coming in, the level of that person may vary. So looking at what policies you have right now, statements you have, and conversations you can have even without having a HR person, super important. Would you say, especially when you were mentioning your networks and stuff, Katie, would you say that there are lots of studios out there that don't have yet a HR functional person in place that could do with some support like that?
Yeah, completely. I think you're right. I think studios, when they start, they just think, right, we need to hire in the people who can actually make the game. They tend to think about HR and the other functions afterwards. But I think, it's absolutely crucial to get a HR person in from the start. And that doesn't have to be a full-time permanent HR person. It can be potentially just a HR point of contact that you've got for 2 days a week that knows your studio, that can help you. Of course, I would say this, but I can't encourage it enough to have a HR or a people person from the start to help put all those things in place. And I think it would mitigate a lot of things that happen further down the line.
Yeah, I agree. But whilst you're waiting or whilst you're planning and you have it on your roadmap, I'll have HR when we have 30 people or 15, having in place policies that are easy to understand, that are digestible, that are not hidden away in a drawer on a piece of paper somewhere, that everyone talks about, is going to be really, really important, because the policies are always in place and they have been for years, but it's how do we bring those to life as an organization that's quite small, quite niche, quite new. You know, the gaming industry is, I suppose, a newer industry than maybe other of the screen industries, and therefore that some of the practices that we'd like to see in place right now are still developing. So where we can have in place great handbooks, policies, and things that are, you know, great stand-up, great communication, transparency around what makes you successful here, super important. Even thinking about another policy, which I didn't mention before, your sickness absence policy, that's really late. I mean, it's great to know it's there and how it supports you, but burnout happens, as we spoke about before the sickness policy kicks in. So there are lots of policies there that can support, but I think maybe a statement around the company culture and burnout specifically, you know, what it is, what it isn't, and how you tackle that within the organisation could be something that could be brought to life quite easily.
Brilliant. Katie, a couple of things before we leave you. First off, if you were talking to someone in the sector that hasn't thought about burnout before, what would you say should be their first port of call?
I would start by keeping it human and just having a chat with maybe your direct reports. If you haven't had a check-in with them for a while, just say, hey, it's been a while since we've had a call. I want to check in on you. Like, how are things going? How's the workload? Have that check-in if you haven't had it recently. And in terms of from the employee point of view, I would say be brave and speak about something that maybe is going on with you, because everybody wants it to stop as soon as it can, really, before it does escalate, because you don't want to be going off and not being able to work, and the company doesn't want that either. So it's within everybody's best interest to understand the issue as soon as they can, so that, you know, steps can be put in place to stop it from getting worse.
The other thing I'd say is around role modelling behaviours. I think that leaders, managers, anyone that manages others has a massive responsibility to do what they're saying that others should do. So if you're telling me, you know, go home, here's your boundaries, but then you're emailing me at 9:00 at night, or you're working on the weekends, then I'm going to say, well, even though you're saying I should be doing this, your behaviour means that to be successful here, I should act like you. So I want leaders to really look at the responsibility they hold around being loud about when they're leaving and why they're leaving, or why they're closing their laptops, or, you know, not emailing you at 8:00 at night. I think those are the things that really go a long way.
Katie, is there one resource that you'd have on the top of your list to recommend to people?
Yeah, I would say so. If you are the owner or a manager in a small business and you don't have HR support, I think ACAS is a good place to start. I mean, they've got basic policies and procedures there, you know, easy to read and all compliant. So that's a safe place to start, I would say. There's training that ACAS can do as well. So even if you wanted to put your managers on some training and you don't have the internal HR trainer, then I would say that's my first point of contact.
It's been really helpful hearing how you've looked at this really important subject.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Katie, for joining us for this episode. Tacita, of all the great suggestions Katie has given us, what's the main one you'd like us to focus on?
I think for me, if we want to look after all the people that we have in our screen sector, we've got to start by giving ourselves the time and resources to be good leaders. If we're doing regular all-nighters or not displaying great behaviours and practices, what signals are we sending to our team? What about you?
Well, I think it was good to hear that some small changes will make some really big differences. You know, even if the business doesn't have the kind of resource or the person like Katie with her skills, you know, we could all consider doing a little bit, perhaps just having a proper onboarding process for everyone in our team, or perhaps setting up some regular one-to-one sessions or an anonymous online check-in so we can find out how everyone's feeling. It meant that it doesn't have to be complicated or costly, and we can do it in ways that we all feel comfortable with.
Yeah, and as Katie says, it makes so much more sense to invest in looking after your team up front than footing the bill for burnout later on.
Yeah, once again, thank you, Katie, Netspeak Games. Thank you, Kelly, Andy, Dan and Gina for producing this episode, and to my colleagues Catherine Evie, Karen, Lizzie and Val for their help with the programme. Thanks for listening to the WorkWise for Screen podcast, supported by the BFI awarding National Lottery funding.
Our online platform provides lots of easy to understand information and invites to our events. Visit our website at workwiseforscreen.org.uk and register for the latest updates.
Please follow us on social media and join in this crucial conversation.
And contact us with suggestions for future episodes or if you can support the programme in any other way. This podcast is produced by Podcast Labs. Music is by Benjamin Squires.